In today's lecture, we are going to discuss Friedrich Nietzsche, born in 1844, lived up to 1900. So technically, he is a 19th century philosopher, just at the died at the turn of 20th century. So as you notice, somebody who has changed the course of philosophy during his lifetime. Now, something important about Friedrich Nietzsche is that he is oftentimes strongly criticized for his views. He has somehow invited conflicting reactions to his thinking. For the very many conventional kind of philosophers, he is somebody with a satanic mind. Even some people called him Antichrist. That is the worst critique you can give to anyone in the Western world. Some have even considered him as a master of ruthlessness, others thought of him as a clown. Very few, however, celebrate him as a hero and a prophet. The reason why these conflicting reactions are made on him is probably because I think he was born ahead of his time. In his own time, when he spoke about many of these ideas, people were not capable of handling those ideas. They were not prepared yet. Personally, I think he has great relevance for our world today in the contemporary situation. One of the greatest things about Nietzsche, according to many of his commentators, that his ability to combine the depth in German thinking and the romanticism in French philosophy. So a certain literary fineness that comes from the French romanticism, and there is a certain philosophical depth. One of the things that we need to understand about Nietzsche is to somehow see what makes him to be a thinker ahead of his time. I personally think it was his early life that shaped many of his thinking. Therefore, it may be important to know a little bit about his early life and the context in which he lived. He was born in a small town of the then Prussian kingdom. Germany was part of this Prussian empire, in a Lutheran family. Now, Lutheran means it is one of the Christian sects. So it was founded by Martin Luther some 500 years ago. He broke away from the Catholic Church, which was universal at that time, and then he founded his own church because he had a lot of disagreements with the Catholic Church at that time. So that history I will not get into. But then, therefore, since he was born in the Lutheran family, and then his parents, particularly his father, was a Lutheran minister himself. A minister is somebody like a priest, somebody like who officiates their cult, their liturgy. He was also given the name of the king of Prussia, which he did not like it. That is because Wilhelm, his middle name is Wilhelm, that is, on the one hand it refers to the Christian name, but also it is the name of the king of Prussia, and he wanted to give up that name, that Wilhelm, because it is a symbolic gesture of delinking from his own religion and also from the patriotism of his family. One can notice already in his early days, in his teenage, he was already revolting to established structures, whether it is religion or the kingdom or the patriotism or whatever it is. One can notice that very vividly, the way he symbolically renounced his name. By the way, Wilhelm, the middle name, is a German form for English William, probably that you are more familiar with, but it simply means William. So, but then in German it is called Wilhelm. Because he was born in a Lutheran family and then born of a Lutheran minister, he did also theology. Theology basically means study of God, basically about, in this context, about the Christian um, ideas about God, and also all related doctrinal, dogmatic positions related to that. It was much later he decided to do doctorate in philosophy. And because he had also some background with classical studies, so this approach to philosophy helped him, because philosophy had always to do with some of the classical culture, including the Hellenistic culture, the Greek culture, in other words. Nietzsche was influenced by two important people during his lifetime. One is Schopenhauer, whom we would be discussing after we discuss Nietzsche. Ideally, we could have discussed him earlier. The other one was Richard Wagner. Now, later, once he was attracted to the Hellenistic culture or the Greek culture in his studies, he slowly parted ways with Wagner, because somehow he thought that, Wagner had deserted this Hellenistic idealism, and therefore it was not much of great help. So that is the reason why he parted ways with Wagner. Nietzsche was known for a period of intellectual asceticism, even without knowing in which direction he was moving. And his own life was full of struggle for victory against many difficult situations, including his ill health, and his eyesight was becoming bad, and occasionally found himself in a situation of poverty. He also had an impulse for suicide. But then it is during this period, when he was really struggling with his life, he produced the great masterpieces. Nietzsche had a very pathetic end. He became insane, and then, of course, he had a lot of delusions and so on. Finally, he had to die in 1900. To his credit, he has many wonderful works. A few of them: The Birth of Tragedy. This was published in 1872. He also has another important book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, a book for all and none is the subtitle of this book. Who is Zarathustra? The founder of the Zoroastrian religion. So it's a very interesting piece of work with a lot of symbolism, if you anytime want to have a look at it. Beyond Good and Evil. This is about Nietzsche's ethics, which already called into question the way in which we try to think in binaries, binary opposites, good versus evil. The Twilight of Idols is another important book. There are many books, I am just giving a few ones. There is also another book, The Gay Signs. In fact, what I used to do is, when I have a real class, in the physical classroom, I would ask students to read some sections from The Gay Signs and discuss with them, but then that may not be very, it may not go well now, unless otherwise, if you guys are taking another course which I will be giving, Existentialism and Phenomenology, where I will be doing real textual study of some of these thinkers, where I would consider him as one of the existential thinkers, or at least the forerunner of existential thinkers. I would take up some of those texts. But at this stage, it's enough that we have some general idea and some general reading. If you can have something about his philosophy, that is fine. Now let us come to his philosophy itself. Now, Nietzsche had adopted a three-phased critique, mainly of the 19th century in which he lived. He was subjecting to evaluation and criticism three aspects of human life: the cultural aspect, the historical aspect, and the scientific aspect of human life. Nietzsche realized that he could not find genuine culture. He could not find a genuine culture neither in the individual nor in the society. In other words, what he meant by that is people are just satisfied by drawing something from their cultures and blindly following them. There was no way in which they had a synthesis of these practices that is involved in the culture. Nietzsche was also against Hegelian principle that history is necessary rational development of the absolute idea. That was the idea of Hegel. Hegel thought all that develops in the history develops in a rational way, and it is all about the idea that is getting evolved. Nietzsche thought this kind of looking at history itself merely as a history of ideas, that also done in a rational way towards a particular end goal, is very deterministic. The danger of having such deterministic worldview is that it affects the spontaneity of life. So history itself has to be seen in different ways, at least can be seen in different ways. So Nietzsche considers the different ways in which history can be seen is as monumental, antiquarian, and critical. Not any one of that is perfect. Each one of them can be very helpful, but each one of them can be also equally harmful. But it is very important to keep in mind these three different ways in which history can be looked at. If you look at history as a monumental reality, then the way you deal with history is to look at the past for noble examples in heroic acts. So we often refer to some heroic personalities of the past, whom we would admire, we would look up to with respect. So that is a monumental approach to history. If you have an antiquarian approach to history, you look at history in such a manner as to make our present existence meaningful. How the history of the past is capable of making our existence today significant or meaningful. The third aspect of looking at history, which is a critical history, according to Nietzsche, is a corrective to the first two types. It is corrective because it allows you to look at the past not merely to look up to people with respect, with awe for the heroism they had, or to see how that has made our existence today meaningful, but to be critical of what has gone in the past. Nietzsche believes all these three aspects perhaps are necessary, especially the third aspect, which is a corrective. Otherwise, we can be very, very romantic about history. Therefore, combining all these three aspects are important so that we can cure people of certain, what he calls a cultural disease of historicism. So this is the a way in which he looks at history, the historical life. The third, the scientific life, again he is very critical of the scientific attitude already of his day. One of the reasons why he is very critical is science fragments people. It disintegrates people in the name of specialization. Instead of looking at life as a holistic entity, it fragments life itself. Because science can only do that, science can only progress by fragmenting human life, by specializing in a particular aspect of human life. Well, it may be important, but nevertheless, it somehow leads to fragmentation of human life. So life itself must be given importance, not one or the other aspect of life. And he believes that if we tap correctly the culture, history, and science, we can achieve celebrating life, giving importance to life, bringing back life alive. So that is how he begins his philosophy itself, by having a critical outlook to these three aspects of human life: cultural, historical, and scientific aspects. Nietzsche's philosophy is often referred to as nihilism. Nihilism basically connotes the idea of negativity, or even according to some, the idea of emptiness. In fact, we have in the Indian philosophy, in fact, Schopenhauer was very much influenced by certain concepts of Indian philosophy. We have the concept called shunyata, or shunya, particularly very powerfully present in Buddhism. Now, shunyata, yes, it is empty, but in a certain way, it also has a greater or a deeper meaning to that. Probably this idea of Indian philosophy through Schopenhauer could have influenced Nietzsche. So the meaning for nihilism is slightly different. In fact, the term nihilism itself originated in Russia, and probably the clearest expression of that is in the famous novel of Ivan Turgenev, or Turgenev, however you pronounce that Russian name. The famous novel is Father and Sons. That is a novel that was published by Turgenev in 1861. So you can see it was at the time of Nietzsche. So the main character in this particular novel, Bazarov, was a young man under the influence of the most advanced ideas of his time. So he declared himself as a nihilist, which others consider as very bitterly. Now again, the idea is not just emptiness, it is to have a sense of fulfillment within that emptiness. So the situation is meaningless, and we need to look for alternatives, a different situation, a different world. So that is the meaning of this nihilism. So Nietzsche seems to be kind of taken this aspect. It is not merely to be negative about it, that it is everything is empty, that it is meaningless, but there is a way in which even within that, however purposeless this life may be, however unstructured this life may be, this life is one, and therefore we need to try and find alternatives. So there is an approach of nihilism which is slightly different. So therefore Nietzsche's nihilism is very multi-dimensional. It includes intellectual, cultural, moral, religious, and social spheres. In fact, nihilism for Nietzsche is something that follows another situation. The another situation which is deplorable, he calls it the decadence. In other words, Nietzsche divides human life into three, not in terms of the past, present, and future, but in terms of each stage leading to the next stage. There is a certain linear approach here. The first stage for him is the decadent stage. So nihilism only comes as a reaction to the decadent stage. So if you understand nihilism from this perspective, it makes the idea becomes clear. Decadence is followed by nihilism, or some people call it nihilism, whichever way you would like to call it, which is again followed by tragic vision of life. I will explain each of these stages of human life as Nietzsche conceives it. What is the decadent stage all about? The decadent stage is a stage where people find meaning in life. People are happy and comfortable because they find meaning. And how do they find meaning in life? Within a worldview which is religious. Basically, people assumed God gives meaning to their lives. So God here stands for not merely some abstract entity or some person living outside up there or anything. God is the very embodiment of all the values that we have in life, whatever values it can be, social, cultural, moral values. All these values derive its ultimate meaning within this religious worldview because God gives this meaning. So you hardly can challenge that because they are told to you as meaningful and you need to embrace them. And the worldview works within a certain ideal, like if you are virtuous, you will be rewarded. If you are wicked, you are punished. So Nietzsche considers this is merely an imaginary happiness because it is an imaginary ideal which somehow raises or extols certain spiritual aspects to the neglect of your earthly existence, because all values and virtues for Nietzsche are built on imaginary ideal. But then people don't think, they are not made to think. So he uses a symbol for this particular period of human stage of human life is the camel. What does the camel do? The camel does not protest, the camel does not resist. The camel is very happy, content, because it finds some kind of meaning by shouldering the burden that is imposed on you. So all these values, all these virtues are basically some imaginary things and which are imposed on you. You, like a camel, merely carry that burden on your back. And Nietzsche considers this man, this human existence, as the ultimate man. Ultimate man because he doesn't think beyond it. He is just stuck there. He is happy and comfortable, carrying the burden. The symbol is obviously camel. Obviously, this meets with a certain reaction. What is a certain reaction? You begin to destroy the whole premise on which this decadence thrives. What is the premise? God. So you announce the death of God. The moment you announce the death of God, everything gets lost because there is no one to give you meaning, and therefore there is nothing intrinsically meaningful about life. There is nothing that is value and virtue. You don't need to carry the burden that is created. But then this leads to nihilism. Now suddenly you realize God is dead. There is no meaning in life. You begin to think in the decadent stage. You do not think beyond this. You begin to think and you are able to say no consciously to the decadence. Therefore, you are considered as a higher man. You are able to rise above the decadence. That is why you are higher. And this is symbolized by lion, because this is very reactionary. Because nihilism basically is an idea that not only gives death to God, but it is also you become conscious of decadent state. So because you are conscious of decadent state, you begin to think there is nothing that is sacrosanct and you can reject everything because life is ultimately meaningless. So everything that tries to give meaning, religion, morality, metaphysics, all can be just rejected. It's like a lion that roars and then somehow destroys everything that grounds reality as meaningful. So this is the stage of nihilism. Now, nihilism is not the end in itself, because you remember, nihilism is not merely a negative attitude, it has to somehow help you look for alternatives. So, Nietzsche does not say we have to resign passively towards this purposelessness, this meaninglessness. What you need to do now is somehow you create purpose. You can create purpose through what he calls will to power, an expression which has often been misunderstood than properly understood. Later, as we know in the history, this has been appropriated by Hitler himself. Of course, Nietzsche's sister was largely responsible for that because she was Nazi, and she kind of twisted the ideas of Nietzsche to make it, a Nazi propaganda. But Nietzsche hardly had ever thought about it. In fact, he died much before Nazi emerged. So the will to power is an assertion of the self. In other words, you try to give meaning to life. It is not that you are saying no to decadence, now you begin to affirm earth and life on earth. That is very important. That is an affirmative dimension. Nietzsche characterizes this particular stage of human person as overman. In English it is translated as Superman, but the only difficulty I have with this translation is it somehow makes us think about this comic character, the Superman who dives and flies. He didn't mean that. The overman is somebody who is able to overcome all those obstacles in your life. So Übermensch, the better translation is overman, though there's not a common English word. If you want to use Superman, you can do that. Only thing, be aware of the fact that it has nothing to do with the Superman that we are used to. The Superman or the Shaktiman that we are used to from our childhood. Now, what is the Superman? Superman is the meaning of the earth. The earth is itself chaos. It has no intrinsic purpose in itself, but it can only be directed by will to power. We must remain true to the earth, and the earth is real, and we must say yes to earth and life. Nietzsche calls this as a tragic vision of life. Well, the word is, the expression is quite intriguing, but the tragic vision of life, because you don't have an intrinsic meaning or a purpose inbuilt in life. It is up to you to create one. So, as I told you, in these three stages of life can correspond to ultimate man, higher man, and superman or overman, to be more correct. So, overman is what in the book Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Zarathustra announces as the meaning of the earth. So, as I told you, he also uses three symbols: the camel, lion. By the way, the last symbol is very interesting. It's a symbol of a child. Why child? Camel is always carrying the burden. So, you are like in the Decadent Stage, you are like a camel carrying the burdens of values that was given to you from a certain religious worldview and so on. Lion negates itself being a camel. So, saying no to all the burden of absolutism in philosophy, morality, and theology. But then it is only a sense of saying no. It's only a reaction. The child says yes to the instinct of life. So that is why child. Because the child is spontaneous in embracing life. The child doesn't have any law or models to go by. It just is a free. It has a free play. The child remains true to it and finds meaning. That is why the symbol given is child. So these are the three stages of human life, the decadence, nihilism, and tragic vision of life, each one corresponding to the ultimate man, higher man, and the overman, symbolized by camel, lion, and child. Now let us focus on how Nietzsche interprets the two aspects that are found in our own individual and the collective life. These two aspects are Apollonian aspect and the Dionysian aspect. Now, Apollonian aspect and the Dionysian aspect, it sounds a little weird to us. If you know the Greek mythology, obviously you understand, what it means. Apollo and Dionysius, both are Greek gods. They have two different functions, obviously. This particular idea Nietzsche develops in his famous book Birth of Tragedy. So he's trying to look at how Greek tragedies got developed. Obviously, according to Nietzsche, the whole of Western civilization traces back its origin to Greece. So the Greek mythology gave some shape in their life, obviously. And tragedy dominated the Greek life. Life of the early Greeks was full of miseries. Obviously, they looked up to gods and goddesses in search of meaning of their existence. Apollo is the god of light and prosperity. The role of Apollo is to defend humanity from the dark, dangerous forces of nature. Obviously, he is the god of light, so therefore he has to defend humanity from this dark force of nature. So Apollo is normally considered as the patron of the Greek civilization itself. Hence, Apollo is often associated with visual arts. You remember, visual arts has to do something with the light, because that you are able to see. Your eyes kind of, it has a light to see. But also you have the whole idea of light is important for sight. So sculpture and painting, for example, is associated with Apollo because they are visual arts. But also it points to an idea that it gives certain disciplinary principle in human being. I guess light is something that sets things in order. So Apollo sets order in the chaotic world. Dark is associated with chaos normally. Something is dark is very chaotic. Something which is light is illuminated is well ordered. So also Apollo therefore is related to, because of this disciplinary principle, it is related to rules and norms. Something of an order. Dionysius, on the other hand, is the god of vegetation. Vegetation basically means something that sprouts and dies, the cycle of life that it unfolds. But at the same time, he is also the god of drunkenness and ecstasy. Hence, music and dancing was associated with Dionysius, because oftentimes music and dance have a certain ecstasy element. And it is very true when people are a little bit, under the influence of alcohol, we tend to, play music and dance. I mean, it's part of a certain. It's not the strict order. There may be some elegance and order in that, but it is not really by a rule or something. It is a free, spontaneous movement. That's all about it. So, in his Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche analyzes these two Apollonian and Dionysian elements in Greek culture. There is a continuous conflict and opposition between these two tendencies. The tendency of Dionysius, which constantly gives importance to the lawless, passionate instincts, whereas Apollo, the Apollonian, tendency, that somehow asserts the ordered, rational thought. Something like in a common language, what you would speak like the reason versus emotion, another binary that we are used to. Apollo is more about the rationality, well composed, well ordered. The other one is more, passion, the instinct, certain lawlessness, and so on. The Greeks became intellectual, too intellectual perhaps, when the Apollonian attitude was excessive in them. But then, when they become too intellectual, this destroys their own life and their own spontaneity. I mean, art associates spontaneity, whether it's music or dance. When the Greeks had Dionysian attitude in excess, there was lawlessness, instinctive expressions, and even occasionally riots. The Greek genius could not accept this conflicting duality. Hence, they synthesized it in tragedy. Tragedy, therefore, is nothing other than the Apollonian embodiment of Dionysian instincts and powers. This is a quote from Nietzsche himself. Tragedy is an Apollonian embodiment of Dionysian instincts and powers. Sounds fascinating. Thus, in tragedy, the Greeks ultimately found meaning of their existence. In other words, life at bottom is indestructibly joyful and powerful. That is the Dionysian instinct and powers. But then it has to be given certain order. And that is the birth of tragedy. Nietzsche clarifies the distinction between the Apollonian and the Dionysian by extending them to truth and art. Art for Nietzsche consists in fresh illusions, while truth consists in stale illusions. Truth are merely worn out metaphors. It's like, the old coins which have lost their faces, They are more a metal than coin. That is because our primal mode of contact with the world is essentially artistic, makers of images and metaphors. Rationality is the destiny of any intuition that survives, and intuition is the source of any rationality that prevails. So therefore, art uses fresh images and expressions. Truth uses the already worn out images. For example, when you say God is love, very commonly used metaphor in the Western world, it could be either art or it could be truth. It could be art if it is a fresh image. It can be truth if it is a worn out image. So the Dionysian and Apollonian elements are present in art, in music and painting, because the Dionysian in the music more of an ecstasy, the other one in painting more of an order. So the Apollonian art is more in terms of what is connected to our sight, the visual impressions that we get. It is about giving clarity. On the other hand, Dionysian art is not in clarity but in disindividuating. Of course, we cannot have this rigid compartmentalization of this. There can be Apollonian element in music and Dionysian element in art as well today, and we cannot really. But then he is trying to look at this whole, how there is ultimately at the bottom there is a joy and the power of life, but there is also a kind of way in which this is ordered. So that is where the tragedy is born. So Nietzsche thought of his own life as something that has to do with impulse and unreason. So he somehow equated Apollonian dimension with Socrates and also later with Christianity. And even he thought this is oftentimes this is how we think of Socrates and Christianity, but there could be a Dionysian element that can be associated with Socrates and Christianity according to him. Generally this is how people think. Now let us come to the idea of Nietzsche's understanding of human. But before we begin that, I think I shall stop here for a while because that will take a while for us to discuss about some of the important concepts like the will to power, the eternal recurrence, and so on. But this very idea of life itself we have discussed. We may have some questions, so we'll discuss that. Thank you.